Folks, we are live. Welcome to Talking Crit. I am one of your hosts, Eric Tenkar, your bartender in the OSR. With me is Bad Mike Battalato, he of North Texas RPG Con fame, and and as if we summoned him, the one, the only, Jim Kitchen.
How we doing, campers?
He's just especially.
Wow, look at that wall behind Mike. Holy crap, that's amazing.
A wall of coolness, baby.
Gosh, I wish I had a wall as cool as that instead of the bookshelves of despair.
Okay, your bookshelves are awesome, dude. Now this is we're gonna do a real quick tour of the new office.
I can see
my wife pulled down to the studs this office. Literally nothing. The floor is now we now have a laminate floor. Repurposed some of the furniture, but everything behind me is new. This is all IKEA. She gave me this really cool. I mean, IKEA has some cool things. So cool things I can put miniatures in. I mean, I got a cool little cubby. But the best thing is obviously the shelves. So this is exactly they make these shelves now with grooves. They're made for displaying artwork and or whatever else.
Oh, nice.
So I've got so much stuff to display up there. I'm just going to change it out every once in a while. So my theme now is the middle shelf is my comics. Those are all first appearances.
Yeah.
I have first Guardians of the Galaxy, first Deadpool, first Spider-Man Black costume, first Venom, first Black Panther, and first Luke Cage.
Yes.
Hero.
For hire.
Now you notice that the grades of these aren't gray. That's a 7.0. I mean, these are okay, but these are all just stuff that has a personal, that I enjoy. So that's my theme now is first appearances. These are all my 9.8s that I got slabbed. Nothing that I'm really that in love with, but on top I try to put some more valuable stuff. My Dragon one, my Dungeon one, my Strategic Review #1. I put my B1 that Darlene signed, and my Warriors of Mars. So I'll change them out every once in a while. But I am just so excited about that. And then I got to be very careful moving my computer, as Eric knows it will shut off if I.
Yeah, we're rolling the dice.
These are also going to be display shelves too. I'm still working. So when I cleaned out this, we took about 50 boxes out. Probably 1/4 of that amount are going to go back in here. So guess who's having to prune their collection and get rid of crap? That's me.
Crap. If it ain't Scottish.
So
I feel like it's pull stuff off our shelves and show it night.
Yeah, show me.
All right. Well, I don't know.
I don't have anything that look. This is just the beginning. We've only just begun.
That's right. Sing to me,
but I think
salty devil.
What I'm going to do over here. This over here, I think I had an idea. I'm going to turn this into my hardback, kick-ass hardback shelf. So here I've got the really incredible History of Middle Earth, which is basically the Silmarillion in 3 gigantic volumes. And I'm going to start putting my my nicer stuff up there. So I think I showed you this earlier. This is the 2-volume John the Balladeer.
Nice.
By Manly Wigwell. But so my nicer things, I have a nice shelf in my bedroom, but nobody sees it except my wife and I. And believe me, she could be less interested in John the Balladeer 2-volume hardback set. So I'll probably.
I believe what I'm hearing is that human science has yet to create an instrument that can measure how small her interest is.
And they may not. They may never. This may never happen. So.
It is incomprehensibly small.
It's always great when you get to a convention and you start talking about minutia. And I don't want to be misogynistic here, and this is an anti-women, but look, women, there's things that we like that they don't like, and they probably shouldn't like, because really they're just wastes of time. And so I like going to conventions and talk to people like Jim and Eric and Bill Meinhardt this, because we can argue the minutia of the interior hobbits of OD&D, just something so minute, and we could talk on it passionately for hours. And most women who are intelligent will tune out so quickly because it is really.
I want to be there when Kim George stabs you. I'm just saying, right? Because Gamehole's going to roll around, and before you know it, there's going to be this scream of rage from a very small pixie dwarf-like object hurtling through the air at you.
She's the exception that proves the rule, though. Kim is the exception that proves the rule. And most women are noping out of that. They're noping out of these discussions we have. So yes, and look, they should, because some of the minutia we discussed at conventions is ludicrous. We really shouldn't spend that much time on how mailing labels of early Dragon magazines from 15 through 25, is it really worth more with the mailing label? I mean, that's the kind of minutia. And then you look at the mailing label and it's just a blank piece of paper with the Dragon art. You're like, what the hell are these guys talking about? This, they come in different colors. They come in different colors.
I'm always interested when people, if you go back to that time, particularly let's say from 77 to 81, TSR suddenly is on this just seismic ramp up of interest in how things are going. I've told this story before, but my Dragon magazine subscription was messed up. At one point, I went 3 months without getting a copy, because what TSR was doing was TSR was getting the copies. TSR paid the printer to put them in envelopes and then adhese subscription labels to them. Mm-hmm. But they would arrive from the printers in bundles. They essentially, if you ever a newspaper delivery person, you would get your newspapers and they would be bound by that sort of transparent tape that you had to pull or cut to unbundle the papers. And so the printer would send bundles of Dragon magazines, and they would turn around and take them to the Lake Geneva post office and drop them off to send out as periodicals. And what TSR expected was that the post office would cut each bundle and separate them and send them on their merry way. And the post office was like, yeah, we're not doing anything you're not paying us to do. And so one guy would get 12 copies of Dragon magazine number 50, and 11 subscribers would be like, hey, why didn't I get Dragon magazine number 50? And so this happened to me 3 months in a row. And after the third month, my grandfather went to the postmaster in our local post office, who raised hell. And then, other people were raised in hell, and so on and so forth, and eventually got changed. But getting into that minutia of labels and envelopes and all the rest of that, when you're in the middle of the storm, you're just trying to ship shit as fast as possible. This is why, like I have watched grown men arguing over the contents of 4th through 7th edition white box sets, when Tim Kask or Frank or anybody else will say, we were putting them together as fast as we can, and nobody paid any attention as to what printings we were putting in what boxes. We were just trying to make boxes and get them out the door. And I think it's very easy, after 30, 40 years to be like, well, I think we should have a conclave about mailing labels and white box set distribution models. And you're like, buddy, I got bigger fish to fry. Like, I'd rather have a Coke and a smile and shut that. I got nothing.
There's along those lines, there's the disputed, is it 4th plus print of the white box, which is ludicrous, because all the 4th, if I remember correctly, all it is it's the 5th print boxes with 4th print books. I mean, yes, you're right, Jim. They just Frankenstein the hell out of this.
Right.
And so
that's right.
So asking things to be, okay, this is where print 1 stops. This is where print 2 begins. This is where print 2 stops. This is where print 3. No, that's not how it was. They were running a business. You're right. They were just trying to get stuff out as quick as possible. And they didn't care if it was, whatever. And so, yeah, they had a leftover. I mean, that's what, and Tim said the same thing. He said what you just said. They would just grab a book. Oh, we need a 3rd print brown book. There you go. I got an extra one over here. Maybe that one had hobbits in it. I don't know. It could have been from the early set. You didn't know what was going to happen.
And this is the other part of this that I always remember, right? So collectors want things to be tidy. They want things to be neat and easily defined. And when things don't fit what is their box or their belief, then you get these terrible, well, that's not really what it is. So I have two of the Lizard Man belt buckle. And one of my Lizard Man belt buckles came from somebody who answered an ad and bought a TSR lifetime subscription. And you wrote the check and you got one of everything TSR made. And there were two guys in Calgary that did this. They knew each other. They're friends. One owns the Century Box. One's worked at the Century Box forever. But the two of them were like, hey, this is a good deal. Let's write them a check. And so they got one of every single thing that TSR ever sold. I have no idea how many people bought into this, but there's at least two people that I personally know who did. And they both got Lizardman belt buckles. They both got one of everything. And when WotC bought out TSR, one of the things they had to come to terms with was what to do about this, because neither of them had gotten items for like a couple of years. Ooh. And had gone after TSR, was like, what's the deal? What's the deal? What's the deal? And finally, WotC agreed to send them an assortment of one each of everything that TSR had published, one of each of everything that WotC owned TSR published up to a certain point, and then that was it. It was done. But it worked out to 2 pallets worth of stuff showing up. Oh. And so, yeah, like a pallet for each. And so, it's very easy to say, well, the Lizardman belt buckles were only given to TSR employees, and that's the only people who have Lizardman belt. Well, no, actually, that's not the case, because I have a Lizardman belt buckle that was owned by a TSR lifetime subscriber, and that's where he got it. Right. Because TSR made them, and TSR sent him one of everything. So I think collectors really want things to be very neat. They want them to be easily defined. And unfortunately, this stuff is very messy, and it's not. I talked about Lionel Trains last week. The guys at Lionel were spray painting train bodies in a room with bodies hanging off of wires so that they could get you could see the drip lines. You could actually see the drip lines on old cars. But Lionel was also willing, if you were a department store and you were like, I want 30 of the state set in this color, the salesman was like, I need to get 30 of them in that color because I closed the deal for 30 state sets. Right. And by God, they would do it. And so people would show up at the York train show with these oddly colored sets, and somebody would be like, warble garble. And somebody would say, well, actually, if you look, it still has the Montgomery Ward or whatever local department store label on it that says turquoise blue from Lionel. There's no bitching and arguing about this. This came from Lionel. This was a color, and then the warble garble people are always like, screw it. And so our hobby is like every other hobby of collectibles, where, I always think about what's it going to be like 50 years from now. I will be dead. There will be no question that I will be dead. And my son, ideally, will still be potting around, and he might half remember some of this bullshit that he's heard me talk about over the years or whatever, but firsthand accounts are going to be pretty few and far between, unless we record this and we save some sort of record. But eventually, all this stuff enters into hearsay, and you have to try to excavate this. That's what makes John Peterson's work so much fun, is that he's constantly going back to the roots of the hobby and trying to find all this stuff that matters, that's interesting in a scholarly way, but is also presentable in a way that other people want to take part in and enjoy. So,
well, we've lived long enough at this point to get into arguments with people online that came after us that insist that this was printed. This, I can't tell you. Look, I try not to be a.
So I had a moment today.
I try to be a dick about it.
I was sitting around a hospital for the better part of hours today. And one of the things that was really interesting is I was flipping around and I saw there is a anime from Japan from the mid to late 80s called Outlanders. Now, there was a book, there was a manga, but there was an animated OVA special of Outlanders. And in it, Earth is invaded by aliens, led by, surprise, surprise, a bikini-clad princess. Shocker. Ooh. There, Japan. So we see a handsome young man She shows up, she beheads somebody, then she turns and sees him, and they have a moment, and she kisses him. And now everybody can understand each other. And I watched a bunch of nitwits in the comments going on and on about how this is what came first, because the Teen Titans animated cartoons obviously stole this from Outlanders, because that's the way Starfire learned how to speak English. And I'm like, you're all effing idiots. George Perez did this in the Teen Titans #1 before any of you were born, like by 20 plus years. You know, Teen Titans came out in, what was it, 77, 76?
No, a little later there, like 19.
A little bit later, and actually Teen Titans 0 was in DC Presents issue.
Yeah, they had a
26.
Yes.
Yes. I had that one.
So hard to
And
find it.
so Outlanders took the idea from Teen Titans, the original Perez issue, and again, these are people who are not aware. But I literally watched 20 plus people going on and on and on about how the Teen Titans cartoons, both of the animated versions, have clearly stolen this from Outlanders, and they're not willing to recognize it and blah. And I'm like, you guys are just morons, right? Know your history. At least have some sense.
Yeah,
of
you
knowing
can
your
get the
history.
most defeating arguments, right? Because of our knowledge. And look, I don't want to argue with people as a rule, but when people when one person says something false and the next person says, yeah, that's true, and then like you said, Jim, 20 people say it, I'm like, okay, enough. This is going to get to the point where you're going to get bad information is getting out there. And so I'll pop in and say, no, I was alive back in then, and here's what happened.
Yeah.
I remember one. So just one example for them. They didn't believe that the Monster Manual came out one year, then the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide. And those of us who lived through it knew what it was like to have the Player's Handbook and Monster Manual, not have the Dungeon Master's Guide, and not have the descriptions of magic items and the TM charts and all that stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now
they
we're
couldn't believe that. They're like,
and now people are
that would
bitching
never
because
do
all 3 books aren't going to be out by Christmas time. Christ Almighty!
I just said, look inside. The print is 77, 78, 79. I mean, it says in there what year it came out. No. They all came out the first year. The reason that your Dungeon Master's Guide has a 79 in it is because it was a little later than the other Dungeon Master's Guide.
So I think I've spoken about her before, but I'll throw this out. I grew up going to a comic book store in Huntington, West Virginia called Comic World. And Kathleen was one of the first women in the industry to own a comic book store. She's still in business today. I think I was her 3rd customer. And so she has seen it come and go and watched all of this. But people will talk about a delay in a book, right? They'll talk about how, it was delayed by X number of weeks or whatnot. And Kathleen, who has been there since 1980, 81, I think 81. And so she says, you talk about a delay, but the single worst delay that she can remember is the delay between Camelot 3000 issue 11 and Camelot 3000 issue 12, which was literally 1 calendar year. And I don't remember why that happened, but literally 11 and then a year before you got 12.
Probably Brian Boland's art, because Brian Boland was very traditionally a very slow artist.
Yeah,
extremely slow, but his stuff is great. I mean, Boland.
And she said, like, I literally had a customer die before issue 12 came out who was a subscriber. And I think about that, right? Like, every once in a while, like I think about, gosh, I want to live to see this, or I want to live to see that, or whatnot. And I just think about, there was some poor schmo in Huntington, West Virginia, who was like, I can't wait to read issue 12. Oh shit, I'm going to die before issue 12 comes out.
Well, Jim, one of our favorite comics. What about Planetary? Planetary had delays. Look, I was reading Planetary when it came out, and I stopped and waited years for the collected edition because I got I didn't remember what happened. I couldn't remember what happened, and I believe there was not just one delay. There was several delays.
Oh, there were several, and the best part of that was, and I know exactly what you're saying, simply because every time I would see a new issue was coming out, I would start and I would reread every issue before the new one came out, and then I would read it and be like, well, And now it's 6 months, 8 months till the next one comes out, and I'll just do it. But I think it's one of the reasons why I appreciated it so much is that I would reread that series when the new issue came out, so I was caught up on all of it. And come on, after we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, I went back and I reread the whole damn series. And again, I think for 27 issues, Planetary accomplished more in 27 issues than, frankly, entire 4 or 5 year arcs in some of the Marvel and DC titles. And Jesus, Planetary is still, you could buy every issue of Planetary or buy the collected editions, and those 27 issues, having just reread it, the alternate universe one, the JLA one, is garbage. The art is just terrible. But the Night of the Batman issue is still fire. I mean, having just reread this, when they run into Neil Adams' Batman, and then they shift to another universe and they run into Adam West Batman, and he has female supervillain spray that he hoses in the one character's face, and then it goes to the Dark Knight. And the Batmobile is the giant hulking tank from the Dark Knight. And then it just keeps going. That's great. But in those 28 issues, Planetary does more, and is a more satisfying read than any crossover event you've ever read. I don't care.
Most of them suck.
And come on, like the last crossover event that I paid any attention to was Age of Apocalypse in 93. And that lasted for, I think, 4 months. All the titles changed for 4 months, and then the entire universe went back to being normal. And that's the last one I really tried.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with events they started out, oh, wow, something really cool is going to happen. It's going to affect all my favorite comic characters, too. Yeah, it's going to affect them all for 3 months, and then it's back to normal. And by the way, buy these 35 issues, that's not going to really change anything in the universe at all.
And Bob has a great point here, right? So one of the most interesting things, like him or loathe him, there's a science fiction fantasy author named Larry Correia, and so he sparred with George R.R. Martin about the fact that Martin has not gotten the next book out, and they had a very public spat where he essentially called him just like lazy, like get off your ass and write the book.
7 years.
Yes, but wait for it.
7. And
so Correia broke down and decided that he'd always wanted to write a fantasy novel, and he wrote one, and the publisher was like, you want to write more? We'll make it a trilogy. And he instead didn't turn it into a trilogy. I think it's 4 or 5 books. Like the last one has come out, and he said, this is it. I'm done with the series. This was good fun. But he points out that he created a whole new fantasy series and published all 4 or 5 books complete. Like, every single one is in print, and George R.R. Martin still hasn't gotten the last book out. And I think that's where you say to yourself, I'm willing to chase a lot of things. Like, I'm willing to hang in there. Like, I'm a guy that read Ted Williams' Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn books, and I can remember waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting on the third one, and I know he was going through a divorce, and I know that book dragged, and when it finally showed up, the book's like this thick. They split it into 2 mammoth paperbacks, and I hung in there. But I think there's a time and place for us to say, well, no.
Well, I'll give you another example. Steve Erickson, who wrote the Malzahn.
Yes.
Now Malzahn, 10 books. It took him. I just looked because I forgot it. It took him 12 years.
Yep.
And these books, Jim,
they're huge.
The books. They're this
huge.
Big. The world building's incredible. The characters, I must have 100 characters in books. 10 books, 12 years. And they're all that big. And he just did it. He just sat down and freaking did it. And that way, Christmas time, there's a new book. Every Christmas you sit down, oh, look, a new Steve Erickson book. This is awesome. And you read it, and you're not pissed off. You're not upset. And, it's just, some people... Look, there's lots of reasons. Gosh, we could get into the weeds of Jar Jar Martin. There's all kinds of explanations and theories and such about what he's done. I mean, my theory is easiest of all. I just think he he has massive writer's block when it comes to this subject. He's written other things in between. He just doesn't know what to do with his book anymore.
He doesn't know how to stick the landing that's going to satisfy people who were completely unsatisfied with the way that the TV show stuck the landing.
But you look, quality is great. Quality's awesome, but there's something to be said for actually coming out with your product and doing it. And I think even Larry Correia said, I like Larry Correia. He goes, I'm not the best writer at all because because I think there's a quote that Stephen King said, I'm the Big Mac or McDonald's of horror writers, and then Correia said something like, well, if he's the Big Mac and McDonald's, I'm the QT, or I'm the 7-Eleven because I'm even lower than that. But he gets the stuff done. He gets it done.
Yeah,
that's what's important.
And so this is a big week for me because so we're sort of book nooking here. If I really think there are 3 significant space opera authors of the last 25 years, and so Ian Banks is almost always there's 3 English space opera authors that are really worth checking out, and I cannot recommend this highly enough. Ian Banks' culture novels are an astounding world-building exercise. I think if you like space opera and you like a shit ton of separate threads all coming together, there's 3 authors that really fulfill that. Ian Banks's culture novels are a little of what I would call left of center. And that's not that there's none of these 3 have a lot of heavy-handed politicking or agenda-driven. It's just the way he writes and what he set up. The culture novels are spectacular. High recommend on all 3 of these authors. The one who I think is more in the center is Peter F. Hamilton. And Hamilton has a new book that's just come out this week, Exodus. I haven't got it yet, but I'm going to get it, and I'm going to settle into a chair, and I'm going to start reading Hamilton at some point in the next few days. He's really, really, really known for a series of books that begin with a reality dysfunction. It's a massive trilogy. The paperbacks were split into 2 each. And his sort of space opera future universe, very well done. Lots of short stories, lots of interesting characters. But the novels are great, and he did that series, and then he followed it up with another series that's just as good and interesting world building. High recommend Peter F. Hamilton. And then finally there's Neil Asher. Neil Asher's a little right of center, and his books are the Polity universe, and almost everything is set in the Polity universe. There is a quiet revolution, and artificial intelligences say, you guys are crap at managing yourselves. We're just taking over, and we'll be the government, and you can do what you want. We're going to expand into the stars. They've created, because the AIs can do the heavy lifting on the map, they've created teleporters so that you can travel across incredible distances in space. And so humanity took the stars and has spread out and didn't encounter any other alien races until they encountered the Praetor. And the Praetor are giant, awful crabs, and they find us delicious. And what follows is over 100-year war between mankind and the Praetor that leaves just swaths of space in a dead zone. And so world after world is hit with antimatter warheads. Billions of people die. And there is détente. And so he's got several trilogies that are set in the Polity. He's got several standalone novels. The way I always tell people to jump into it, the first book is Praetor Moon, and then the one to read after that is The Shadow of the Scorpion. And Asher's great idea was drones. He had war drones, intelligent war drones, in a way that I hadn't read. And when you discover a war drone named Sniper, he is the sarcastic, bitter veteran of the Praetor War, and he's always got some action going on. He's like Don Rickles. He's like Don Rickles' character in Kelly's Heroes. He's just always got a slice of the action going on.
Ooh.
And so these 3 authors really defined space opera in the late 90s, early 2000s, Really, really good. So I'll list them again. Ian Banks, Ianbanks, The Polity, Peter F. Hamilton. The Commonwealth Saga is very good. The Dreaming Void series is very good. If you want just a sample of Hamilton that's a single book, I would really recommend. One second. I'll get the name of it. Fallen Dragon. And Fallen Dragon is an interesting premise where all these colonies that Earth sent out, the companies that funded these, or the private investors that funded these, or the governments that funded these have a way of bankrupting people. And so there is a company that has taken on assumed the debt of these colonies. And every 10 or 15, 20 years or so, they send asset collection teams to the colonies to come back with precious jewels, precious metals, technological craft. They're essentially raiding parties, and they show up and they loot the colony, and then they're like, and we'll see you in 10 or 15 years. And so Fallen Dragon is about a colony world that is experiencing one of these resource collections and what happens during. And it's a fascinating book. It's a really, really well, and it's a standalone. Like, it doesn't have sequels, it doesn't have short stories, but it's really good. And the final one is Neil Asher and Neil Asher's Polity novels. And again, I would recommend start with Praetor Moon, which is what happens when the Praetor ambassador finally shows up and meets with the human ambassador. And it essentially begins with him picking up the human ambassador, biting him in half, and all the Praetor opening up with rail guns and beam weapons, and it's on. And the Praetor fleet crosses the border, and then we discover they're more advanced than we are in armor and weapon technology. And it's an oh shit moment. But Asher has moments of brilliance, right? So at one point during the war, the AIs create the single largest naval building facility ever conceived of. And literally they're teleporting raw materials into one end, and full warships are coming out the other as fast as they can. And because of this, the Praetor are gradually losing the war. It's just a matter of time. And so finally, the Praetor somehow managed to locate this facility, and they send everything. And in the course of the battle, literally ships are coming out one end, and they're intelligent. They're full AI, and their lifespan is measured in minutes. And watching all of her children die, one after another, after another, after another, the facility loses its mind and jumps and disappears, and nobody knows where it went. But it has a schizoid break, watching all of its children die, and it takes itself out of the war. All three of these people have created amazing universes that if you want to get into and read, again, Banks, Hamilton, or Asher, and all three are just great space opera.
Wow.
Okay, I'm going to throw a space opera at you because you got me all excited, Jim, and I wrote this down. Have you ever read Jack Campbell's The Last Fleet series?
Yes, have all of them. All of them.
It's much lighter in tone than anything you mentioned there. It would be really good for, let's say, young adults, but it's still good for adults too. So the plot behind this, there's this guy who was Black Jack Gary, I can't think his name was. He was a great military pilot, and they're fighting these things called the Syndic worlds. They're fighting the Syndic worlds. And he had a last gasp attack of the Syndic worlds that failed, and he was lost. And so this war has continued over the last few hundred years. So what happened? So basically, they find his ship after 100 years, and he is frozen in cryogenics. They unfreeze him and say, "Oh my God, our greatest hero is back." And so they said, "Hey, you can go with us. We're attacking the Syndic worlds again. You can observe." What he starts realizing is they've lost all military tactics because of what he did. He became an example of you run straight ahead and attack no matter what the odds and whatever. And of course, it was a boneheaded move on his part because his fleet got destroyed. But he realizes that they don't have military tactics anymore. All they teach is take all your ships and run into them, and just kind of like
Yes.
a war in the Mesopotamian time. Here's your guys. We're going to run at each other, and one's going to win. And he goes, "Oh, no! You need to start doing military tactics. They've never been taught military tactics. But what is that? No, you just get the biggest ship and you just run it." So the whole series is him coming back and basically slowly saving the worlds for them, saving the world from themselves, going, no, we need to get discipline back and military strategy and this and that. And so there's all these different plot lines. His crew begins to worship him and says that you should be the leader of the free world. He's like, no, that's not the way you do things.
I didn't sign up for that, man. I did not sign up for that.
Exactly. You don't have to sign up for that. Then there's another faction that wants to assassinate him because obviously he is now he's the hero returned. And there's this prophecy that he would return someday. Of course, it was a bullshit prophecy they just threw out there to make people have hope. Well, he's returned, so he must be, God on earth. And so there's a whole faction trying to kill him. But it's a really good series. I think it's about 5 books long, and then the author continued it for a few more series. There's
there's the Lost Fleet. There's several, and then eventually, this is not really a spoiler, he beats the bad guys, only to discover there's something behind the bad guys pulling the string.
It's worse than bad. There's more, So, but it's very they're easy to read. Somebody introduced me to them. I didn't think I'd like them because I'm reading it going, the writing's okay, whatever. But I got hooked because they're like candy corn. I'm just like I'm eating them up. And so and the spinoff series, I have not finished the last 2 spinoff series. I need to go back and probably start reading them over again because I forgot what happened. But yeah, Jack Campbell, the Lost Fleet. Give that a try. If you like that, like I said, there's I think 2 or 3 spinoff series. You'll probably like those 2. They're easy to read. They're just very, very breezy. Very, they don't get into a lot of, I guess you call it hard sci-fi. It's more of the classic, like kind of Skylark of space.
So this is a good time. We'll talk about a couple of my favorites. So one of the most interesting authors of the late 50s, early 60s, who got cut short was a fellow by the name of H. Beam Piper. And Piper did not feel like he was successful and ended up taking his own life, even though there were checks in the mail on his way to him. He just felt like he had become a terrible failure. But Piper is often cited as one of the first science fiction authors who actually created a history of Earth going forward thousands of years. Like he actually had a chronology. And so there's he created what's called the Federation. So the Federation timeline, there's early Federation novels. There's short stories and novels set in early Federation, the height of the Federation, the collapse of the Federation, then the Intergem, which is just chaos and anarchy, and then what came after the Federation, which is Empire. And so almost all of Piper's work is available on Project Gutenberg. You can download it. You can download it for whatever reader you want. There's PDFs that are literally copies of the original short stories out of Analog and Astounding and so on. So here's my Piper list recommendation. Piper is mostly known in the U.S. because of a series of ace reprints in the late 70s, early 80s. And so people might be familiar with the Little Fuzzy books. So I'll sort of go from the beginning. Piper was a big historian, and Piper thought that history does repeat itself. In Piper's future history, North America and Europe, China, all the Northern Hemisphere countries kill themselves off in a giant nuclear war. And pretty much the only places that survive are South America, Africa, Australia. The rest of it's toast. And so the early Federation works that are really, really, really worth reading are Oomphel in the Sky. There's Uller Uprising, which is the story of the Sepoy Mutiny, but on another planet, where the aliens decide it's time to kill all the Terrans. And so you have a chartered company that's there to help bring the populace along, but also to represent the interests of the Federation. And it's one guy trying to hold it all together when the number of humans on the planet are outnumbered about 10,000 to 1. Excellent read, great read. Then you have the sort of the Federation at its height. And that's something like Little Fuzzy or 4-Day Planet. Those are both really great reads. And then the start of the collapse comes. And so there was a brief period of war in the Federation called the System States War, where a bunch of the system states decide to leave, and the Federation ramps up to fight a war like nothing else, but everything collapses. One of the system states' worlds gets nuked into oblivion, and the rest of them are like, and we're done. But that sort of kicks off the start of the fall of the Federation. And so that's when you want to read something like The Cosmic Computer. And there's actually two versions of that. There's The Cosmic Computer and Junkyard Planet. But then that segues into the fall of the Federation, and then you have this terrible period where every world is left to fend for itself. And a bunch of people who left the Federation to just get out founded what are called the Sword Worlds. And so they're all named after mythical swords like Excalibur, Graham, and so on. And the Swords World spawns Space Vikings. And essentially these people go back in and to the Federation. They raid planets for valuables, antiques, metals, and so on, and they haul it all back to the Sword Worlds. I don't want to spoil Space Viking, but it's a spectacular book. It really, really is. And Piper's version of where this is going and what's going to happen afterwards, great stuff. Then Empire. Empire's mostly short stories. But if you're not familiar with Piper, you really, 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 you really should be familiar. And anybody can go on Gutenberg and download all of these. And so I'll hit those again. I really think the linchpins are Uller Uprising. Then you want 4-Day Planet and Little Fuzzy, and the second one. The third one's not in public domain. Fuzzy Sapiens. Then you want Cosmic Computer / Junkyard Planet. I would read both of those. They're both versions. There's some differences that are enjoyable. Then Space Viking, and again you'll have a look at it. Ty mentioned in the comments, Jerry Purnell worked with Piper, knew Piper, and had the rights per Piper had the rights to continue to write in his future history, but never really executed on that. And it's a shame because Piper's future history is just so rich. You could fill it in and you can throw all sorts of stuff in there. But he's one of the founding fathers that if he had lived, we would be talking about Piper the way we talk about Asimov or Bradbury, Heinlein, any of these people. And so give Piper a look at. I don't know what else. Oh, I know what I was going to mention. I had this in my back burner for a while. Del Rey and Ballantine Del Rey really did a great job a few years ago, like 15 years ago, bringing all of Howard's works to trade paperback.
Okay.
And so what that was there was a British small press that actually went and did that. And Del Rey said, we'd like to publish the mass market editions of that. And they said, sure. And so there's a couple of Conan collections. There's a Kull the Conqueror collection. They're really, really, really worth finding. If you've not read Conan, if you've not read Howard, and you're like, I don't know where to start, I would really, really recommend the Del Rey. They've never fallen out of print. Ever since they put them in print, they're just constant sellers. I think for a generation, all of us can remember when Michael Whelan did the black and white. There they are. Michael Whelan did the great evocative covers for Del Rey's printings of all of H.P. Lovecraft stuff. These are the Howard versions by Del Rey, and they're so good. Really and truly, if you want any idea, you should get those.
Kane, here's the Kull. I've got all of them.
And I'm sorry,
here's the first Conan. There's three.
Okay, I'm going to tap in real quick. So let me just throw something out. Stephen Fowler mentioned a couple. I don't talk about Darkover anymore, and I'll tell you why I don't talk about Darkover anymore.
I know the story of this,
but I'm going to keep this short, right? I know people who absolutely lived and breathed, and just every Darkover book. And anything Marion Zimmer Bradley did. And Mists of Avalon, very well regarded at the time, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, as great as Mists of Avalon may have been, as great as the Darkover series was in time, I don't recommend them anymore. And I'll tell you why. It's because you can go out on the internet and you can find out all of the terrible things about Marion Zimmer Bradley and her husband and what they put her daughter through. And after you read that and you have a great idea of that, you'll never recommend Marion Zimmer Bradley's works again. And I realize that can be that sounds a little harsh. I just don't care. You know,
No,
Marion Zimmer Bradley's daughter absolutely made it clear what awful things that her mother, and I think he was a stepdad, but whatever.
Stepdad, but the mother knew about it the whole time and was okay with it.
Yes, and was okay with that and so on. And so I'll
tell you what's weird about that, Jim, is I remember reading, and this is going to sound like it doesn't make any sense, but I remember reading Darkover when I was a kid and feeling a little icky. There was just something about Darkover. It was always just kind of a little weird, like so weird. And I just never got into it because of that. It was just
so every generation of fandom has had something they latch onto. So when Gordon R. Dixon was writing all the door size stuff. Okay. In the 60s, you had people showing up at science fiction conventions that were Dorsai. You know, they would dress up in silly uniforms and so on. And when Logan's Run, the movie, came out, for about 3 or 4 years after that, science fiction conventions were overrun with dudes that were dressed as Sandmen and women and men that were dressed as in those terrible outfits from the movies, the like brightly colored unitards and stuff.
But the mini skirts though. Mm-hmm.
Well, sure. But I've seen enough dudes in mini skirts at this point in the last few years. I'm really good. But you had people chasing them around, and so in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a whole Darkover where people were showing up at conventions where Marion Zimmer Bradley was and making her oath swear them and so on. And you know, fandom can be really, really weird. And Dragon Con is a nexus of great fandom and weird fandom, right? I've been to one Dragon Con, and I don't think anything's changed since I was at that one. It's not a condemnation, but just I know that nobody watching this or listening to this can be surprised that if I tell you that there are people in the hobby that embrace some of these things a little too much, you would be unsurprised. And I think, I think the less said about that is better.
Yeah, we don't have to go into details. You can find it online. Like Jim said, look at one. You'll find all the details.
Go take a look. But
I'm with you the same way, Jim. I don't recommend Bradley stuff, and I don't read. I got rid of all my Bradley books when that came out. I just dumped them all, and that's it. And
I know bookstores. I know used bookstores that when Marion Zimmer Bradley comes in, they just throw them away. Like, I don't mind
anything that has to be preserved. It's nothing that she didn't write anything that's so amazing that you're like, oh my god, this must be preserved for future. Nah, just.
But I did see another. I mean, we're sort of having Book Nook night tonight. I did see a great picture a few weeks ago of somebody who has one of every single Ace paperback, every single Ace book, paperback and hardcover. And they've been working on this.
That is a bucket list. That's a bucket list. I've heard collectors have said, I'm going to get all the Ace paperbacks, and that's like good luck.
Dude, have at it. But some of this stuff, and then you think about what Ace published, right? You think about all the things that Ace published. We haven't talked about this. I can't remember us talking about this, but this is so in our wheel well. And it'll tie back to gaming, so people grousing in the comments will be better about this. So I remember I used to walk a paper route with my friend Dean, and one of the things that he started talking about, he's like, I just read this amazing book, and it's short stories, and I shit you not, they're all tied together. They're in the same setting. And I'm like, whoa, what are you talking about? And it was Thieves World. And Thieves World was this amazing series of books that Robert Asprin had this moment of genius where he was at a science fiction convention and convinced some other authors and said, let's do this setting. We'll set it in this little sleazy, seedy part of an empire that this is the ass end of the empire that nobody wants to be at. This is a town that has changed ownership several times. And the first 4 collections are spectacular. About book 5, they start to take the left turn to Albuquerque, and they go to shit really quickly after that. But the first 4 books
We're pretty tight.
are spectacular home runs. And if you have not read the Thieves World books, it's Thieves World, Tales from the Vulgar Unicorn. I can't remember the third and the fourth.
And there's also graphic novels done by
Yes.
Tim Sale did the art,
Yeah.
really good, and they follow the books exactly. So
Yes.
if you'd rather have a visual representation,
Right.
try to find the Thieves Guild.
There was a
novels.
And Chaosium.
Wasn't there
Chaosium had a
standalone?
line of product. They had the Thieves World box set, and they had some modules as well. But just great. And if you love the books, they were just spectacular as well. The map, the sanctuary, the city was sanctuary, and it was a beautiful map. It was big, so you could sort of see all the places they talked about. Really, another one of these older series that's sort of gone by the wayside. I think when Aspirin died, the publishing rights got a little wonky. I've not seen it come back in print in a big way. I'll take a poke and look and see while we're talking about this. But an absolutely seminal short story collection series from the early 80s.
For Shared Universe, they did a great job. And yes, Bob, thank you. Shadow Spawn was a standalone novel within the universe. Character was introduced, I believe, in the first book.
What was cool about it was a shared universe author, and I just wrote in there. One of the reasons it went downhill was when it first came out, it had all these different authors writing stories, and they started narrowing down the authors who would do the stories, and it got to where I think it lasted 12 collections. There was only like 2 or 3 people writing the stories towards the end, and so it had a very samey aspect to them. It was I think Lynn Abbey was one of the 2 or 3 others. But it wasn't just like, Philip Jose Farmer's writing one and this guy's writing one. I mean, because Philip Jose Farmer did write a story in the Thieves World. So that's the problem was it was this really cool idea that got tedious as they stopped having new authors come in and write stories. And it was just the same 2 or 3 people. So it lost its uniqueness. The uniqueness was all these different people are going to give you their impression of the Sanctuary universe. And when it got down to where it was only the same 3 authors writing all the stories in the book, then it's like, okay, well, it's not that unique anymore.
Yes.
Well, that was a good hour on book night. I was wondering, so that was fun because I'm like Jim. I can talk comic books, I can talk books, I can talk sci-fi all night long, fantasy.
So let's talk fantasy for a little bit. Let's talk about fantasy series that people ought to read. So I'm a big believer. That you got to look outside. Sort of. We go through cycles, right? We go through this is in demand, this is in demand, and it goes up and down and up and down. I mentioned Tad Williams earlier. I think Tad Williams is an amazing fantasy author. He writes big, doorstop novels that are huge and heavy and have tons of weight behind them. Interestingly, some of them don't hold up very well, and so one of them that I would say is, the Shannara books. Nobody ever talks about the Shannara books the way they used to.
Have you seen the TV series?
No, I haven't, because I heard how terrible it was.
Oh my God! I made it through 2 episodes.
And let's talk about what was a huge series, an enormous series when D&D was first growing up, was Thomas Covenant. All the Thomas Covenant books.
Oh my God!
And then it just faded away. Now,
he finally finished the 3rd trilogy only, I think, 10 years ago, Jim. I mean, and it. Yeah. So the first trilogy. So, by the way, Thomas Covenant, I think it's a brilliant, great series. It gets a lot of hate online, because the main character is extremely unlikable.
That is established early in the book.
He is extremely unlikable. He's not a hero, and he says he's not a hero many times. And in the first book, he rapes a young woman while under the influence of some kind of a mind expanding altering substance. It changes everything. In terms of people wouldn't even read the books past that. They said, "I'm not."
Oh my God, that was the gear check. That was the gear check in that series, right? It used to be in raids online. You had to have a certain level of gear. You weren't going any further, and it was the gear check, right? In in World of Warcraft, if you went to Icecrown Citadel and you couldn't get past Lady Death Whisper, that was your gear check and you were done. Mm-hmm. And I just remember I read that scene and I put that book down, and 12-year-old me is like, I don't think I should be reading this. And I had to wait a couple of days to pick it back up, but it's one of those series that nobody ever talks about anymore. Raymond Feist. Nobody talks about the Rift War stuff. And
Raymond Feist stuff is great. And Mechemia, the world he created, was actually a gaming product. And the gaming products are really good. The Mechemia products are excellent products.
So let's talk about Gore. Gore's come up a couple of times. So let's talk about Gore. So my first exposure to the Gore series was a guy who sat behind me in 9th grade, and we were talking about stuff we had read over the summer. So between 8th and 9th grade. And he had begun the Gore books. And I'm not sure that somebody in 9th grade should be reading the Gore books at that point in your development.
Unless you're really into BDSM at a very young age.
And so the Gore books, like, I don't judge people by their lifestyles, right? As long as nobody's getting hurt, I don't care, right? If you need to wrap yourself up and call yourself a fish called Wanda, I don't give a shit. But the Gore books, the Gore books are an endorsement of a lifestyle. And whether you want to admit that or not, they are. The Gore books are a bit of sadomasochism, a bit of if you're a dude with a hairy chest and a lot of gold chains and a shirt cut down to here, the Gore books are there for you. And I just remember, like, there are 20 or 30 of these. My friend in high school had them all and had read them all and continued to reread them. I have no idea where this dude is now. I have no clue where he is. But I mean, really and truly, like, it's just cut, paste, print. Paste, print. Change some names. I mean...
So let me tell you, I got some personal knowledge of some of the stuff I want to get to.
Oh, God. I don't need to know about your dating life.
No, this started out, for those who know, the Gore story started out as a John Carter of Mars type spinoff where this guy goes to a different planet, right? He played it pretty straight. It wasn't the BDSM. There was elements in there. He found out his readers really identified with that. So as the series goes along, by about issue 5, he is full in BDSM. I mean, it doesn't start out that way, but then he gets more and more like, this is what the readers want. The writer was a college professor, and I believe he may still teach college, and did this on the side. John Norman is not his real name. Now, I'm going to tell you something.
Smart man.
It's going to blow your mind. So when I first started buying, selling, collecting online, 1994, that range, I would also look for very hard to find, because I was in half price books a lot, buying all this used D&D stuff that was impossibly cheap back then by the truckload. I would also look for paperbacks that were hard to find that people would look for. One of the series people would always look for were the Gore books, and especially the later ones were the harder ones to find.
Impossible to find. Yeah. Yes.
So what I would do is I would put together complete collections and sell a complete collection. And back then, you're probably making $200, $300, $400 for a complete collection, which was,
right.
It's a huge windfall. So every 4 or 5 or 6 months, I would have a complete collection. I am not kidding. This is absolutely true. Every single person that bought a complete collection was a woman.
Yes.
Not
and so
one
that leads me
single
to
man bought a Gore book.
That leads me to my other Gore story, which is an observation that somebody very important to me once noticed was that if they're a nurse, the more professional letters after their title, the weirder and stranger they are. And so your mileage may vary, but my experience has been that this is possibly true.
It could be true.
So I had a friend who was dating a nurse, and they got along very well, right? And things are going swimmingly. And then, they are together as people who are romantically inclined to be are. And he's like half asleep, and he notices like she's tying him to the bedpost. And the next thing he knows is there's candle wax and a lot of pain, and like suck it up, Buttercup, et cetera, and it all sort of descends into madness from there. But she was a gigantic gore aficionado.
Oh,
and like after she had him trussed up, like she came out of the bathroom in I don't know what, an outfit that was gore themed, and they didn't last very much longer.
I put in there that so I finally got the courage after my 5th or 6th sale. I asked the woman, because there was always a woman involved. I said, I just have to ask, have you read the books and do you know what they're about? She goes, yes, I've read it. I'm part of the gore community. Now we're talking about the mid 90s. Even back in the mid 90s, they had an online community where they would meet up and they would use phrases from, there were certain things that they had, the books, they had these little bells. I mean, I don't remember. They would make these things and they would meet up and they would have these gore conventions where the women would be all submissive and it was really kinky, some kinky shit. But
38 books. 38 books.
Women were into it back then. I was so shocked when women were the ones buying my Gore books. Not dudes, women, man. I'm telling you, and they wear costumes, and it's kind of like we would consider a furry convention now. You'd probably want to stay away from a furry.
If you don't know what you're getting into, you probably better take a good look at it first.
Yeah.
But there's a bunch of other series that people are talking about. The Saberhagen Sword series are great. Let's not forget Empire of the East, a very interesting post-apocalyptic kind of setting. David Drake wrote all sorts of great stuff. He's passed recently, and he wrote some.
How about the Black Company? The Black Company. Now, so
that was another one that got mentioned. The Black Company is one of those. I always find that people sort of, self-segregate, and so like there's military science fiction guys, and they want something that's the military that they were a part of in space. Okay, sure, I understand that, and if you want that. David Drake, Hammer Slammers, that's a great series written by somebody who went through a lot of shit in Vietnam and turned that into writing short stories and novels. The Black Company is a really, really interesting twist on a mercenary company. And it's very hard. I say this because any conversation about the Black Company, you don't want to spoil those novels for people. And I would say get the first one and read it, and if you like it, you'll love the rest of it.
And I'll tell you something else too. I don't think Glenn Cook is a great writer. I think it's a great idea. He had a great idea here. I don't think the series gets really good to about book 3 or 4. He has one trilogy that after the first trilogy, he kind of continues on. It's not really a trilogy from then. It's just a continuation. Book 4 on, I think, are really good, and then I think it gets really weird towards the end.
Yes.
So you cannot get. You cannot get connected to any character because he is very true to the aspect of when you're in a war, anyone can die. He will spend an entire book talk with one character as the center focus narrator, and they will die in one paragraph in another book later. And you're like, what happened? Because that's war. That's what war is. War is anybody dies at any time. He doesn't play favorites with this character, except for maybe his main 2 who make it through the entire book. But other than that, but no, it's a really interesting series. Like I said, it's good. I think you'll read it. And I think his phrase, his phrasing is weird. He's just not a great writer, but it is a really brilliant. It's a brilliant idea. It's a brilliant idea, but mercenary company and in Fantasy World,
and somebody mentioned McCaffrey's Pern books, the Dragon Riders books, and those are interesting because they're again, I think we can look back with some honesty at Anna McCaffrey's writing and say to ourselves, okay, some of it is not the best. It's not the best. It's not. She wasn't a great wordsmith. She was a great storyteller. And I think it's very interesting to see the first 2 books, and then she sort of said, I want to do like a young adult trilogy, which unfortunately is very sexist. And I think this actually ties back to the Darkover books. the Darkover books were one of the first regular series where there was a lot of strong feminism in them, and so I have a love-hate affair with the Pern books because I liked the way things were progressing. Like, you always knew it was an abandoned colony, but you didn't understand all of it. And so then the White Dragon ends with them sort of discovering the original colony site, and then she decided to start weaving a lot more science fiction into this than I think the series could support. And then you have aspects of it that just sort of take over, and then eventually the threat that really got you involved in the books in the first place, well, they solve that, and it's over and it's done. And at that point, you're like, okay, what is there to, like, where are we going with this, and so on. And it sort of loses its way because it's a great idea. We need dragon riders. They have to fight the thread, blah, 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 blah. But then all the science fiction sort of comes in, and I have a friend who's very much, I don't want science fiction. I don't want lasers in my D&D campaign, right? Very much keep these things apart. And I think that the later Dragon Riders books are an excellent example of how these things can go awry. And you can get too many lasers in your fantasy game. And I think that's another good example of that. I think it's a very good example of that. But those are classics. I've waxed on about Julian May's Plagueis in Exile books. I think, again, high recommend on that. Would really recommend those. But we were talking one night about Karl Edward Wagner, and what an unbelievable. Okay, Ty, no, Ty brought up a great series. It's a tough series. And so Steve Sterling is a alternate history kind of guy. Mm-hmm. And he had somebody at Baen who said, I want you to write the most dystopian books imaginable, and he did. and if you're not familiar with those, there's a reason they've been out of print for a while. And they're pretty grim. I won't get into the Draco books, but he was also one of these guys that cranked out other alternative series, like the General series and so on. And Baen has a lot of these authors that write these long series that never end. It's interesting because the Blackjack books, the Lost Fleet books, it's supposed to be what would happen if Nelson you could bring back Admiral Nelson, right? All of a sudden you could bring back somebody of that stature. And one of the series we haven't talked about is Honor Harrington. My God. The Honor Harrington books have spawned an entire universe of authors and short stories and connected novels and so on. And it all began because Jim Baen essentially said to one of their authors, I need a series. I need a series where you're going to give me a book every year. Like, can you do that? And he says, well, I think I could go away. Do you have any ideas? Well, I can come up with something. And so he went back and he decided to write Horatio Hornblower in Space. And he, because of a fluke in timing, he actually wrote, the first 3 books came very quickly. The first 2 books were published very quickly, with the third following. Like, I think they got 3 books out in an 18-month period. And so On Basilisk Station is the start of that series. And then it just sort of goes. And it is a retelling of the French-English naval war of the 1800s, but it's set in space. If you've not read Honor Harrington, the first one, On Basilisk Station, is a free download from the Baen free library. You can download that and give it a shot. Now there's buzz talking about Casca. So let's talk about that little subsection. There is in the publishing industry this men's adventure publishing. And so there's always been a subset of publishing, which is essentially like the old pulp novels, like all the old Doc Savage, Shadow, and so on. And so the hallmarks of these are Remo Williams, where there were like 100. Mm-hmm. It really began with the Mac Bolan books, The Executioner. Oh, yeah. we're not saying he's the Punisher, but we lifted the Punisher from the Mac Bolan book.
He did.
And,
yeah. No,
and, the, and the
Gene
Mac
Colan admits
Bolan
it,
books
yeah.
spawned Delta Force and a bunch of other subcategories.
I'm sorry, Jerry Conway. Jerry Conway admits it. He admits that they were.
And then Casca, the eternal mercenary, because he was the soldier who pierced the side of Christ with the Longinus spear.
And Jesus on the cross told him that you appear to be content with your life, and thus you shall be until I return again. And he can't die. Can't die. So every book is him in a different era, and he jumps back and forth, and he's modern days to the one thing he didn't do any sci-fi, which would have been awesome. But it's every period of history, he's a mercenary, and he gets involved in politics and fighting. And there's kind of a weird plot line where people know that he's the eternal man. They try to find him, and they either want to kill him or worship him. Every once in a while that pops up in a book. But I was just saying on there when I was talking about it, it was one of the few series I read and actually wish there'd been more, because I think he only wrote about 20 something of them. So he never got to the point where he was repeating himself and okay. I mean, God help me, The Executioner and Matt Bolan and Remo Williams, those were like 200-300 book series. Casca was only about 20 something books. It never got to where it repeated itself enough. And I think that if that had been more popular and he had lived and written more books, I think that would have been a great movie and probably a movie series. I think they would have made a pretty decent movie series out of Casca, but it just never got above a certain, like you said, it just stayed in that men's genre, men's war adventure.
And this genre, this sort of men's, so nobody ever wants to admit this, right? But the publishing industry a long time ago recognized that you have to have disposable romance paperbacks, and thus Harlequin romance and all the rest of them. Mm-hmm. And the same way that there are women that move towards that, you have men that are looking for dime store reads, pulp novel reads. And the genres are Westerns, right? And this is where Zane Grey and Louis L'Amour and all the rest of them cranked out an entire career. You had at one point the Mac Bolan, men versus crime, men versus evil, so on and so forth. Remo Williams, which was sort of a continuation of pulp heroes. You had, and really and truly, like such a great reflection of the time. You had the really great post-apocalyptic books like Martha Washington Goes to War and all these other, the Deadlands series that just would never die, and so many in that series and so on. But they're not really sort of what I think we've been talking about tonight. Now, Ty nails it again. The Belgariad. Yeah. David Eddings' Belgariad and the Malloreon. And let's talk about a character that was so important for women for so long, but is hardly ever discussed anymore, and that's Polgara. She's the first wizard. She's the first female wizard in fantasy fiction that holds her own, doesn't owe anything to anybody, and is a role model at just the right time when a lot of women are coming into the genre. Tolkien is pretty much set. And I always say that about every decade there is a huge fantasy series. Game of Thrones hit that. You mentioned it earlier, the Erickson books. I think that's another one. But the Belgariad and the Malloreon, when the Belgariad was published in the late 70s, early 80s, we'll get to Moorcock in a second. But when the Belgariad was published, let's think about what had come out in fantasy series. We had the resurgence of Tolkien and The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings that started in the 60s, worked its way into the cartoons, which we could spend a night talking about the cartoons. But in the 70s, we did have Moorcock. Again, I'll come back to that in a second. But the late 70s was dominated. The fantasy genre, the big series was the Thomas Covenant books. That was absolutely the crushing fantasy series that swept. But the problem is you can't, for reasons we discussed earlier, you can't just hand a copy of the first Thomas Covenant book to a bunch of 12 and 13-year-olds. And the Belgariad is a wonderful twist on the sort of tropes that we expect. But Polgara, I had a girlfriend who really summed it up, 30 years ago. And she said she's the first female wizard I could identify with who was, it's like that scene. It's like that scene in The Return of the King. I am no man. It's Eowyn stabbing the Witch King. Well, Polgara is her own sorceress. She does not need help. She doesn't need you holding her dress. She's just fine. Thank you very much. And we don't talk about her as a character in fiction. In the Belgariad, again, this is the genius of Judy Del Rey. Judy Del Rey was always reading and always finding these authors who didn't get enough limelight, who had stuff that was published. She was the person who gave Alan Dean Foster his great career. She's the person who signed Frederick Pohl and Gateway and the series that spawned out of that. But Polgara is a character that we don't talk about a lot 40 years after the fact. But she's an important part of what eventually would become characters like, what's her name from the Forgotten Realms, the sorceress that Elminster's seeing on a regular basis. What's her name?
Yeah.
The Shadowsill. The Shadowsill.
Yeah.
The Shadowsill's roots as a character lie in Polgara.
Okay.
And good stuff. So, I thought of another series that we were talking. Well, let's talk about Moorcock, right? Moorcock's an English author that came up with an entire. He did the multiverse before anybody at Marvel was like, the multiverse will save us. And he did amazing stuff. Like, everybody knows the mopey albino guy, but the Count Brass books are good. All of this stuff. And this notion that there is an eternal champion, and this archetype carries over into all these different settings. I don't find Moorcock to be as readable now as I did when I was like a horny 13, 14-year-old and wanted a sword that would suck the souls out of my enemies. But
don't we all?
I mean, don't we all?
I mean,
But I don't know. I think Moorcock's okay.
Let me go. I'm going to talk about a couple authors.
Hit me.
So these are very little known authors. I'm always really interested in dark fantasy and weird stuff. There's an author named Matthew Woodring Stover. Now, you probably haven't heard of him. He doesn't write a lot. He's the last 20 years or so he's been writing Star Wars books. But he wrote a 2-volume series. It's called, the first book's Iron Dawn. The second book is Jericho Moon. Now, just tell me if this setup isn't great. It's a Pictish mercenary who carries a double blade axe. Her sidekicks are a wolf. She has a wolf. She has this is, by the way, set after the Trojan War. It's set after the Trojan War during the Bronze Age. A Trojan mercenary who may or may not be touched by the gods because he very mysteriously gets out of deathly situations. And as you know, the Trojan War, the gods were watching over the people fighting it. It's certain people. And then he has another sidekick. He's like a bard or something. Anyway, it's dark fantasy. So they run into necromancers. I mean, everything is really they don't shy away from stuff like slavery and bad things happen to poor people. I mean, it's just it's very realistically drawn fantasy. But he wrote those 2 books. He wrote Iron Dawn. He wrote Jericho Moon. Really great books. Highly recommend them. But he also wrote one other series. This series is called Kane's Law. So this is a weird setup. Let me explain the setup. So this in the future for television entertainment, they take stars and they send them to different planets, and they have them affect the way the planet. Basically, the planet becomes their stage, and they set these stories to the planet. They don't care what happens to the inhabitants of these planets. So this guy, I can't remember his name. I think it's Michelson or Michaels. He's set to this fantasy world. It's a fantasy world. There's dragons and monsters and evil gods and everything. And he is on that world. He's an assassin named Kane. So he goes to the world and basically he participates in these plots that are based. So the people on that planet, their lives are just this movie. But when he comes back home, he's a regular guy and he's married to another actress. What happens in the story is he kills somebody to destabilize the rule of this planet, kills the good king, so to speak. And this evil god who's been in the background for centuries comes forward and says, "Great, that guy's dead. I'm going to take over the planet now." And the TV executives are like, "Oh, this is going to be a great plot for our next TV show." And he's like going, "There's something about this guy. This is not going to be a good TV show." And so he realizes that they really effed up by killing this guy, because this guy is really a god. He is an evil god, and he has the powers of evil god. And he's just starting to realize that our lives are being used for entertainment by these people from this other planet. That these people that screw up our world, these people like Cain, are from another planet. So you have basically the bad guy who you kind of sympathize with, even though but he's extremely evil, though. And you have the good guy who you like, but he's kind of, his morals are kind of shady. Really good book. It's called Heroes Die. Very grim. It's very grimdark. The guy who wrote it, Matthew Stover, is a martial artist. So he gets really writes some of the best combat scenes I've ever read in a fantasy book. He knows, all the stuff, how to swords and combat. And so he wrote, I believe it's a trilogy about this guy, because the first, they begin to realize that something's bad going on this planet, and every book ends with kind of a cliffhanger, and then you have to go to the next book. But those are two really good fantasy series, the same author. Now, I've never read any of the Star Wars books. I don't know what Star Wars books, but like I said, the Iron Dawn, Jericho Moon, two volume is really good, and the Heroes Die, the first. I can't remember if I read the fourth book. I know there's a fourth book eventually.
So
but the original trilogy is really good. It's a different take on fantasy. It's fantasy, but both books have a very different take in terms of, one is almost like sci-fi fantasy, because they're using sci-fi to get this guy to this other planet. But when he gets to the planet, it's like, it'd be like you or me transported to Middle Earth. We're there, we're from the Earth, but this is a fantasy world. So
I thought of thought of three that we've not talked about. Nine Princes in Amber, all of Zelazny's Amber books are a must read. Yeah. If you've not read Nine Princes in Amber, start there. If you like it, you'll love the rest. If you hate it, stop there.
Book of the Month Club, right? Science Fiction Book of the Month. That was the one that you got in the oversized hardcover.
And then Robert Adams, an author a lot of people don't talk about, but the Horse Clans books. Another post-apocalyptic, well, frankly, men's fantasy series, but there was a lot of fun in the Horse Clans books,
and
gratuitous sex, an unbelievable amount of gratuitous sex in the latter books, because clearly the publisher told them what they wanted and he delivered.
There you go.
And then a series that I don't ever hear people talk about, but which is one of my favorites because there's so many great laugh out loud moments. Dave Duncan, Duncan, Dave Duncan's.
Yes, great series.
Magic Casement is the first one. Oh. And it's the series is called A Man of His Word, and it sets up the terrific trope, the princess and the peasant. And will they or won't they? And what follows in 4 books, he promises that he will always protect her, and then she is kidnapped. And he honors his promise to keep her safe. But the series never goes where you think it will go. It never does what you think it's going to do. And you're never happier at any moment because it's just perfect. It's just a great series of little books. And then there's, we could just be here all night. There's so many other great books.
Well, let's put a pin in it tonight, because I want to talk about the
I got to throw one out. I haven't gotten to throw out.
Yeah, no, you've been quiet. You've been a good little boy, Eric.
Okay. No, but I just want to throw out.
Monopolizing it.
The only author as an adult that I had to buy every book as it came out, whether I was working retail or working as a cop, was Terry Pratchett in this world.
Yeah,
it was the one series that when I worked retail, I had coworkers who didn't give a shit about fantasy, science fiction, or RPGs that read it because they like British comedy, and that British comedy, that dark wit, carried over. And my favorite work of his isn't from this world. It was Good Omens. The only book I've read 4 times and listened to the audio book twice, and the series on Amazon wasn't as good as I would have liked, but it wasn't horrible. But good on.
And by the way, they canceled season 3. You heard that, didn't you?
Season 2 wasn't worth it anyway. So
Neil Gaiman has been accused of molesting women, so they pulled that from distribution. They're like, we're not gonna do that.
Okay, I know you want to get to this. So let me just say one thing. Robert Asprin was a lot of great things. Robert Asprin was the guy who thought up Thieves World and Shared World. He's the reason Shared World anthologies exist. Robert Asprin had some great series, the Myth series, Another Fine Myth, all the others. I have all those somewhere. But Robert Asprin was a guy who didn't pay his taxes. And Robert Asprin was a guy who didn't pay his taxes for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And when the IRS came knocking, it was like, oh shit. But this is the greatest example I've ever heard about reading the paperwork. And so Asprin gets the IRS to agree that he gives them some amount of money, and the IRS agrees that they will, that all monies he earns from any books that any of his work that he does by himself will go to the IRS. He then gets Judy Lynn Nye to agree that no matter who writes it, they will share credit for the stories or novels. And when the IRS comes to him after the first one comes out, and then they were like, we want our piece, he's like, read the paperwork, kiss my ass. And the IRS never got another dime from Asprin as long as he lived. And he was in poor health. And essentially, Judy Lynn Nye, after he died, told the whole story about how Asprin was like, if I can get them to sign off on this, I'm good. And they were dumb enough to do it. And that was it. It wasn't all monies earned. It was all monies earned as an author solo credit.
Solo himself, yes, by himself.
That's right.
And so everything he did after that was with someone else. He never
That's
did
right.
anything
So
by
all of the
himself,
Fool's Gold books, all the
everything.
other everything had Judy Lynn Nye's name on it. Yes.
Genius, yes.
Okay, so hit what you wanted to talk about, Mike.
First of all, I wanted to say that was fun. We're going to do that again, an hour and a half. I could spend 3 hours talking about this. But yes. I wanted to talk about the news of the week, which was the Dungeon Hobby Shop Museum, our favorite tourist spot in Lake Geneva. And Eric, since Jim and I have been taking up so much screen time, you go ahead and take center stage here for.
Well, I mean, the Dungeon Hobby Shop, it was announced, or it came out at Ernie's wedding, that the Dungeon Hobby Shop was closing business on the 15th of September, but not just the physical building, but the TSR Museum website, which was the hobby shop's website, was also shutting down. So if you wanted to get your, overpriced Dungeon Hobby Shop dice or TSR dice, that opportunity has passed you by. And there is some theorizing as to why the 15th and why did it shut down so quickly, and what's going on with that TSR museum. Well, it redirects now to WotC. So smarter minds than mine have theorized that this was all part of the bankruptcy filing and settlement, that the anything with TSR in it would fall under WotC's purview and land in their lap. And there must have been a time frame for it. And perhaps without the online store, the Dungeon Hobby Shop Museum isn't viable. I don't know. I do know that, when you're involved in lawsuits, it costs money. And this individual is involved in multiple lawsuits. So
sad trombone. Womp, womp,
Womp,
womp. You mess with the bull, you get the horns. I mean, this is the most predictable thing that could ever happen with this. And it's really sad because we talked about this before. This could have been a really cool place. It could have been a cool, because up to now there isn't a museum for D&D per se.
Well, yeah, but the Lake
well,
Geneva Museum is stepping
yeah,
in. We've got to.
they're doing a yeoman's job. They're doing a great job, and that's I'm glad they're doing that. But I'm talking about something along the lines of the Strong Museum of Play. You have the Seattle Museum of oh gosh, what's the Seattle one called? Not current events. I don't know. Pop Culture Museum.
Pop Culture Museum. Yep.
Yeah, and so and these are places that I think Alex Kamer, one of his brown boxes, is at the Pop Culture Museum, and there's artwork of Elmore and Easley at the Strong Museum of Play. But look, for Lake Geneva, this could have been a great spot because it's a historical building, obviously, and we just don't have not all of us are able to go to Bill Meinhardt's house and see his amazing collection, or not all of us are able to to travel to the Game Hole and see Alex Kamer's incredible collection. This was a great place. This could have been a great place to go and look at some things. And we talked about this too, is that, we're lucky. We're very privileged. At least the three people on screen here. We've seen brown boxes. We've held them. I've auctioned a first print brown box at Game Hole. It was in terrible shape, but I auctioned. I mean, just to be able to do that. Jim's auction first print brown box. We've been able to hold these things and see them and experience this hobby. Most people, 95% of people out there, don't get to see these things. They don't have the disposable income to buy this. And I'm the first one to say I bought most of my collection when it was cheap to buy in the 90s, before anybody knew this stuff was worth anything. I couldn't afford my Merc collection now. My Merc collection would be cost unaffordable. And I bought everything Merc that I could, that there was back in the 90s. So a place like this where you can go and look under glass and wow, there's a Greyhawk, and there's the stuff we have on the wall, there's a Warriors of Mars, there's just that kind of stuff. You don't understand how invaluable that is to the hobby, to be able to, show that to other people and say, this is, look at this. Look, son, this is the first this is a white box. I had a white box, or this is a brown box. This is one of the 1,000, white or brown boxes that were assembled on Gary's table, blah, blah, blah. And this guy pissed it all away because he was a jerk. He was an idiot. And he could have had the keys to the kingdom, and he just chose to just be an idiot. And it's just so mind-boggling when people in our hobby do things like that and just absolutely bite the hand that feeds them and just get involved in just absolutely ridiculous piss fights with people. And this is what happened. And then, and then, with your stated goal being, I want to make $100 million by leveraging a giant multinational company, by cyber squatting on their not even their IP, on just the name of a product. I don't know. I guess I just look at lost opportunities. It's just the opportunity for this to be, look, if I had the time or the money or anything, I would love to start a museum. I would love to have this, but most of us have lives. Oh, hello. Oh, hello.
No,
what are you
Mr.
going to say,
Lanasa,
Platypus?
I expect your business to die.
The platypus. Platypus sounds
That's
sad.
the sad platypus womp womp of the night. Oh my god.
Sad, so sad.
And come on, I think again, I spoke with somebody earlier this week. And I said that I didn't necessarily think that Justin Lanasa even entered. I want to believe that he didn't enter it with intentions of malice. Like I think he saw an opportunity. But the problem is that every fork in the road where you could have taken a high path and people would have been okay with things, it took a different path. It's like I talked about last week where somebody I know said, hey, are you you're operating a museum. Are you a 501c so I can take a tax deduction for what I'm going to send you? And the 2-word lowercase, no period reply was no. And then he sent a follow-up question, no. And then he sent a third question and got blocked.
Okay.
Okay. And so, maybe customer service wasn't his strong suit. But then you have things like the Giant Lands playtest version of the game that had horrific things in it. You have
Well,
all
now
these.
remember, Giant Lands was who?
That's Steinhardt. You're talking
But
about
they were buddies though. They were allies at the time.
Cheers.
That was Steven Deinhardt. But
Cheers that had
Sure,
same story, different verse. Because
but they were, they were associates.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so all this stuff just kept coming back up and up and up, and so many people blocked, and so many people this, and so many people that. And I'm a big believer that when somebody tells you a lot of things, when your enemy tells you what they're going to do, listen, right? When somebody is just set and determined to be the turd in the punch bowl and is demonstrating why they want to be the turd in the punch bowl, and they're knocking people out of the way to be the turd in the punch bowl, accept the fact that they want to be the turd in the punch bowl. And we can look at logos, we can look at trademarks and copyrights and so on, and if he had a legal claim to stand on, the museum would still be open, and it is not.
Right.
And all of this is unfortunate because now the property's up for sale at an extremely inflated price for what it was purchased at. Do I believe that it's going to sell for $1 million? No, I do not.
No, hold on, Jim. It's a discounted from $1 million. It's not $1 million anymore. I believe it's 900,000. So
990,000.
990. Yeah, come on, Jim. I mean, don't exaggerate here.
It's like taking a penny off that.
It's still almost 4 times what he paid for. And come on, if he goes bankrupt from this, it'll be sold in the bankruptcy, and we'll find out what the actual price of the house is.
Oh yeah.
And come on, it has never had the lure that Yolanda's house does. Yolanda's house is the place where it was play tested and created and boxed up and shipped from. And if I was going to say something was a really, the candy shop is in the building most of people associate with the Dungeon Hobby Shop. They associate it with that building on the corner. They've been there. They remember the catacombs, the castle. They remember all this stuff. That's the more, I'll say, nostalgic location. But I don't think. No. Is it worth what he's asking? No, it's not worth what he's asking. I think that's a joke. I think the delusion that it's worth $990,000, because here's the deal. I don't think he's put over $700,000 in sweat equity into that building. For $770,000, if the purchase price was $200,000, I'm sorry, but there's no pool, right? There's no suntan room, and I like an all over tan, as you can tell. I mean, there's just none of this. Like, there's not $770,000 worth of improvements that would justify that. And so he'll go bankrupt. If this goes badly, he'll go bankrupt, and it will come out in auction in the bank because somebody owns the note. Somebody owns the note on that building. If he didn't pay cash for it, there's a bank that holds the note on the mortgage, and as soon as he quits making the mortgage payments, it's done. So I don't know. $150,000. I can't see that he's made $150,000 in improvements.
No,
So
I know he had to change before it could open. He had to do something with the air circulation. I remember that was an issue before.
does it have a handicap ramp? I don't even know if it has a handicap ramp.
I don't know.
And an Americans with Disability, if it's a public space, he would have had to have tried to have made some accommodations for Americans with disabilities. But I don't care. I mean, and that's the end of the whole. That's my summation of all of it. I just don't care. We could say that the house is worth $250,000 now because of market changes and everything else, but I just don't give a shit anymore. I'm exhausted by the entire notion of the Dungeon Hobby Shop because of all the jackassery over the last 3 years. When reasonable people ask reasonable questions and you block them, that tells me everything I need to know. And I'm done. And I just don't care. I don't care because if he had an opportunity for goodwill, he's squandered it with every poo flinging monkey-like behavior he's demonstrated. And eventually, like every toddler that sits in a messy diaper and throws it at people, you eventually walk it away and let the thing just go, just be done. I mean, I hope. I say this not because I know we won't have more things to talk about the Dungeon Hobby Shop in the future, but if this was the last episode we ever speak about the Dungeon Hobby Shop, I'm good. Because at this point, he deserves nothing but contempt and to be blotted out of our memory. In fact, he should only be a cautionary tale. He should, going forward, he should only be a cautionary tale of how to do things poorly and alienate a community.
Look, there's a reason that we still bring up Ken Whitman. The Ken Whitman is because Ken Whitman's still out there and he can still pop up. You never know. And so every once in a while we have to bring up Ken Whitman. We don't want to ever talk about Ken Whitman again. I don't want to think about Ken Whitman. And next thing, and then, you go about 2 years and then all of a sudden Ken Whitman's, he's there again.
Ken Whitman.
Just go away.
Go away.
Candyman, dude. It's like Candyman.
Right. That dude is like a rash.
He's gonna email me his cell phone number next. Come on,
this dude's a rash. Like, these people are a bad rash that won't go away and no ointment will fix it. Like, they are the herpes of the game industry. They just show back up every once in a while. They irritate the shit out of you, and then they go away and linger in your nervous system, and then they pop back up again.
When I'll be back.
That's right. Just when you think you're done with them, they reappear. And all of these people, right? Like, I know that you guys really hammered what's his name from Far West.
Oh, Gareth.
Yeah, but Gareth seems to have shipped some stuff, right?
It took Gareth.
Yeah, but Gareth eventually did. Like, to his credit, Gareth actually did try to I would say that he's done more to make amends than anything we'll ever see from Whitty Whitman. And certainly...
I will say Gareth has done something, but his track record was so miserable, and the way he attacked people, and the way he lied, and we're talking lies. And when you say this product is going to be out by December, I stake my reputation on it, and it's not out for 6 more years, you are a liar. And he was a liar.
And I think we have to remember that. I don't disagree with that. But I think I'm trying to be charitable, right? I don't wake up every day thinking about the Ken Whitmans of the world. I got bigger fish to fry. But I do think that you do have to say to yourself, hey, you can tell me about your amazing, magnificent campaign world, and I'm happy for you. And you can tell me that you've lined up a panoply of RPG superstars who are going to write in your game world, and that's awesome. But if you tell me that you want me to give you money for a Kickstarter or a backer kit or a crowdfunding exercise of some kind, and by the way, I'll write it when I've got the money, I think that should be a gigantic red flag. Mm-hmm. And I think that when these conversations appear, when we see something that looks a little sketchy, I think we have to talk about the Ken Whitmans. We do have to talk about, Dwimmermount. Yes, eventually you got something. But the man also had a crisis after he lost his dad. Okay. But I lost my dad, and I managed to pick up the pieces and go forward. And we all lose a parent. We all lose a parent at some point. We lose our parents.
Odds are you are.
You're gonna.
My dad was in the hospital on his deathbed. I was working in the waiting room because I had work to do. Something you just have to get. I'm not saying, look, everybody's reaction to things happening is different, and I would never say, well, because I dealt with this, you should deal with it. But there has to be a point when you say, look, okay, let's put it this way. People forgive almost any behavior as long as there is an apology and sincerely attempt to make good. And I'm talking sincere, not the I apologize because I have a gun pointed at my forehead, right. That kind of crap. When you apologize to Johnny. I apologize, Johnny. Okay, Johnny knows you didn't mean it. But if you have a sincere sincere belief that, look, I want to be a better person, and I'm sorry I did this. I will get. The American people, just people in general, they will forgive almost anything if there's sincerity involved. Do you? I mean, do you believe me? I think this is true.
I believe a few things. Number one, burn me once, shame on you. Burn me twice, shame on me.
Mm-hmm.
I had a conversation with somebody this week where they asked me about somebody that had sort of screwed me over. And I had a conversation with that person, and they asked me if I ever heard the words, "I'm sorry." And I said, well, no, I never did. And I think that is really at the heart of this. If you tell me, if you say, "I'm sorry," right? The dog didn't eat the homework and then have immigrants eat the dog. That did not happen. I screwed up and I made the mistake and so on and so forth. I think if you're honest with people and you say, this got ahead of me, I'm not capable of doing this, be honest with people and people are okay with this. But it also goes, I think, directly to another subject. This week, I had a conversation. I had two very hard conversations this week about a famous personality within the RPG industry. And I'm really, somebody said it in there in the comments, and I genuinely believe this. We can put people up on pedestals. We're very good about putting people up on pedestals. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, we're all human, and we all have our foibles. I will have great days, but then if I have a bad day and I know I'm a little extra spiky, I try not to talk to people. I try not to, it's just stuff gets to you. And this person in the industry is beloved by some, but anybody who has been around this person professionally knows that this person could be a jackass. And I won't get into all the particulars. But
I'm right here, Jim. If you just
we had a conversation about two very
it's not me. Oh, it's not me.
No.
I'm sorry.
We had a conversation about two very different people. Both of whom are game designers. One of whom was, frankly, he was a product of the time and had a fairly staid opinion and believed a lot of things, which I don't necessarily think most people would buy into. And so I won't say he was ever with malice, but he certainly, he rode the rails out. And then we were talking at the same time about another gaming personality who is an unrepentant douchebag and who is awful. And if you thought Me Too existed for people, this is somebody who just somehow, some way has managed to dodge all the bullets. And the two people I talked to about this week were both flabbergasted. I've had a personal experience with this person. I could tell you the stories are true, and the stories date back. I knew about this in 1997. And the problem is that you have somebody who a part of the community cherishes and loves. But your heroes are human, and we have to remember that. And when we assign these, Lanasa had a lot of people that were just in that man's corner, and they were going to defend him till the day he died. And that there are all these forces that are lined up against him, right? This is like the madness that WotC has hired a hit squad to come find you because you're publishing fan fiction somewhere on Reddit. Buddy, nobody's doing that. WotC doesn't care about your Drizzt fan fiction. Like, if you wanted to wind up with Wolfgar, nobody gives a shit. Like, nobody cares about your Drizzt Wolfgar fan fiction.
New idea for book.
That's right. And so really, at the end of the day, you have to simply put this stuff aside and say, I like this person's work, but they're human and they have failings, and I don't know what they are, and I probably don't want to know what they are. But when somebody goes out of their way to demonstrate their failings to you, you should be smart enough to recognize it and say, whoa.
There's a lot to be said. So what we don't give, Eric and I don't give the Wandering Wizard a hard time anymore, and because Look, this is the guy that stole $40,000 or more from three Kickstarters he never fulfilled, spent all the money on God knows what because he didn't spend it on anything he's supposed to, and afterwards said, "Look, I'm sorry. I will never have a Kickstarter again. I probably should never be allowed in gaming again, although he's back in gaming."
Right.
And he basically just threw himself under the bus and said, I'm a terrible money manager. Don't know what I was doing. I screwed up. I messed up. Blamed it all on himself, which it was all his fault, and then faded off into kind of gaming obscurity. Although he's kind of back, But
this is
there's something to be said for that. There's something to be said for taking responsibility.
This is the last, and that's a good point. Let's leave that up on the screen. I want to talk to that. This is my last book recommendation of the night, and I want to make sure that I get this. I want to make sure I get the publication date right. And the name of the book is Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds by Charles Mackay. It was written in 1841. And in my family, when you graduated from high school, you got a copy of the book. You got a copy of the book, and you were essentially told, give this a read, kid. My dad gave me my copy when I graduated high school. And I know that he got a copy when he graduated high school, and I'm pretty sure that all three of my uncles got it. So why should you read this book? For whatever reason, we sometimes have inexplicable behavior from people. You've probably heard of the tulip craze in Holland, where speculators drove up the prices of tulips. It's extraordinary. I'll read it again. Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds by Charles Mackay, Mackay. And so this is a book that talks to this, right? And during the tulip craze, the single most valuable tulip bulb in the world, the guy who bought it as an investment took it home, and his drunk brother came home, thought it was an onion, chopped it up, and ate it. But this book really gets to the heart of when somebody loses their mind about the dot-com bubble or the silver market or
Beanie Babies
or whatever, that all of a sudden rational people lose their minds and they go with something. And so the point was made about these people that defended Lanasa and were rabid. Let's talk to that. Just as there are people who rabidly defended Lanasa, there are people who rabidly hate the three of us. Singularly, collectively, I don't know who they are, but they do. And that's okay. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and I know that. But we have people in this world that long to be a part of something. They don't feel like they are part of a group, and they want to be a part of a group. And for whatever reason, Lanasa had some adherents that found an identity as being a part of this group. And you want to fight? Let's fight. I can't say that that's a productive thing for our hobby. I can't say that that's a productive thing for people's personalities or how you identify. I'm a big believer. I'll say this, right? Like, after we do a show, invariably in the next few days, I have a couple of people that manage to find me on Facebook and send me friend requests. But they don't say, hey, I watched you on Talking Crit, and I'd like to be friends with you on Facebook. I just get some weird friend request with no explanation and no idea who these people are. And I'm like, okay. And it's not that I'm trying to be unfriendly, but if I don't know you, if I don't have a frame of reference, I'm not going to friend weird internet rando. I'm just not, because I don't know who you are. But we all need to sort of take a breath, and we all need to recognize that the collective wisdom's a lot smaller than the individual wisdom on some of this. And a lot of people were raising red flags about the Dungeon Hobby Shop Museum and trying to speak to this earnestly and give people fair warning, and people still sent in valuable collectible items for the museum. Was it the right thing to do? I don't know. Are they going to get them back? I don't know. But I think it was just a sad mistake. And this is a chapter in the hobby that's closed. And 20 years from now, we'll laugh about all this stuff. But there will be another dungeon hobby shop. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it'll be Beanie Babies. I don't know what it is. But yes, every age has its peculiar folly, some scheme, project, or fantasy into which it plunges, spurred on either by love of gain, the necessity of excitement, or the mere force of imitation, and I would add a need to be a part of something.
Yep.
And that's a great book to read. If you want to use the phrase from the Bible, if you want the scales to fall away from your eyes and you begin to see things with a clarity that few can muster when you're in the middle of the frenzy, when all the other lemmings are jumping off the cliff, you'll have read that book and go, wait a minute, hold on. Do I really want to do this? And I don't think you will. There you go.
Well,
I've stunned them quiet.
Look, I think there is something to be said for second acts in people's lives, and some people pull it off. And once again, I will just say that what can pull it off is sincerity. If you are able to be sincere in what you see is, so I had an internet feud with the guy many years ago, and it got to the point where he interfered in my eBay business. Where
strangers fight on the internet?
One day he decided he would buy everything in my eBay store and then not pay for it. Every single item. I caught him about 20 items in and blocked him because I knew the guy. I knew who it was. This is gosh, probably 15 years ago or more. We had a huge feud, and I can't even remember why, on some internet site, and just hated the guy. We kind of ran the same collector circles. But after that, didn't hear from him for a long time, and really detested the guy because he tried to screw me over in the business, because the way things went, if he'd have bought the items and not paid for them, they would have been taken off the market for a month while eBay went through its permutations of, oh, this guy might pay for it, you have to keep it. And then after 30 days, they would have said, okay, he's not going to pay for it. Oh, by the way, this is a fake name. We can't find the guy. Sorry. You can put all your stuff up again. Meanwhile, I can't make any sales for 30 days. So luckily I found it and stopped it before he got too far. So he was trying to screw my business, and didn't hear from him for years and years. Several years back, I get an email from this guy. He found my emails me, and basically explains he was an alcoholic. He was an alcoholic, going through a really bad time, and he was a miserable human being. Since then, he had gotten married. He stopped drinking. He stopped drinking in this order, got married, then had a kid. His kid was about 7 years old and was being bullied at school. And he said when that happened, he flashed back to the behavior he showed towards me. And he felt shame because I felt ashamed for it. And he emailed me to apologize and said, I would just want to know if you could forgive me for this. And I was skeptical, and I said, I can't forgive you. I tell you this, I can't forgive you at this point, but I appreciate what you've done. I appreciate you reaching out and saying you were wrong, and that you try to do these things, and this is bad, this and that. And for whatever part I played in it, I apologize too, but I really appreciate it right now, but it's going to take me long to forgive you. Several months later, he was on another forum, and he said his son wanted to play a simple role-playing game, blah, blah. And I said, I contacted and said, his Cub Scout group was dabbling in role-playing games. I said, I can send you as much Swords and Wizardry-like material as you can possibly handle, plus folders, maps, whatever, dice holders. I sent this kid a box full of stuff, and his dad was effusive and just said, I really appreciate the fact that you don't have to be my friend now, but the fact that you did that for my son, it means so much for me. And I said, I appreciate the fact that you apologized for what you did. And, to this day now, we're Facebook friends. I think I've forgiven him now. I've forgiven him at this point. But it was just because he was so sincere, and he made the effort and said, look, I was wrong. I screwed up. No excuses. Didn't try to make an excuse. So he said, look, I was an alcoholic, not an excuse. I was a miserable human being back then. I was miserable to everybody. I was miserable to a lot of people, and I had to drop out and then came back. And like I said, we're Facebook friends now. And he appreciated the fact that I, like I said, it took his son being bullied in school to realize that was me. That's what I used to do to people. I bullied people online. I was a miserable human being online. I don't like it. I don't like what's being done to my son. So sometimes your perspective changes. That's what I look for when I look for forgiveness. I look for somebody who makes the effort to say, look, I was wrong. I was wrong. No excuses. I was wrong. You may not forgive me, but I'm just here to say, when you do want to forgive me, I'm here. I'm here and I'll listen to you. And that's the problem unfortunately, with most of the people that we talk about in our hobby that have issues, they never go through that self-realization. And look, we personally know names. We know plenty of people like that in our industry that we're still waiting for their second act. We're still waiting for okay. We'd love to see them. We thought they were a good person. They turned out they were an egotistical jackass. But we'd love to see them come back. We'd love to see them change, and it just doesn't happen. I just don't think that happens a lot.
And I think contrition. This is bordering on a philosophical, religious moment, but it's not just about contrition, right? It's not just about saying I'm sorry. It's about actually acting and following up on it. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people don't understand that it's one thing to walk the walk, but it's one thing to talk the talk. It's when you walk the walk and show me.
Right.
And so we mentioned Gareth earlier. It took 6 years, but stuff eventually started to flow.
More than 6 years.
It took 12 years.
But okay. But stuff eventually started to happen. Whitman, how long's it been? 13 years?
No, Whitman's not quite as long, but Whitman has more.
And by the way, Whitman tried to have a fake sincere apology when he contacted Eric and I and said, I'd like to go on your show. But the problem with that was he wanted to go on the show and explain why everybody else was wrong and he was right. And we're like, no, that's the show we want to do, is the show where you come on and say, I was wrong and I'm an asshole. I screwed up and I'd like to make amends to the community. Not one that, it's all a misunderstanding, folks. And so that's what he wanted to do. We said, we're not going to give you airtime to do that because that is not what we're looking for from you. Sorry.
So I think that's a great note to call it a night, because I can't imagine we have a whole lot. I think we've beaten our horse a lot, but really and truly, let's marvel at the splendor of Mike's new wall. Let's
hold on, Mike. Let me give you a solo for a moment here. Look at that.
I can't tell you how excited I've been behind this table the whole evening. And when
I don't need you to stand up and show us.
No, you don't need me to stand up and show you, but I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, because my wife has done the most amazing job here. This is everything that I could have hoped for. That I waited 20 years to get this, so I'm very excited. Very excited.
Brilliant.
And I can't wait to get the rest of the shelves up so I can show you, and my shelves will look like behind what was behind Jim's head.
Right.
And next week's going to be a barn burner. Next week is going to be spectacular.
Oh, yeah. We got a great show next week.
We got a great show next week. We've already lined up everybody for next week. Two people will be on the show, but only one on camera per the agreement. And we won't tell you who it is until we get closer, but it's going to be a hell of a night. And you're going to want to make sure you...
Yeah, we'll have fun.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun.
Always good to have Matt. Matt and Susie are great people. It's always fun to have them.
Matt Fitch,
so the Mosby.
Well, he blew it. He already said it, so screw it.
Oh, yeah.
Come on, people. You got to give the. Okay, let me tell you a story real quick, then we'll end it. Doug had an idea, because Doug sometimes had crazy ideas. Doug Ray, half of the North Texas, and I had to shoot him down sometimes because his ideas were just too crazy. They showed a basic lack of understanding in how marketing and promotion. He had an idea that he would have secret special guests. What's a secret special guest? I asked him. It's a special guest that no one knows is going to be there and shows up. That's great. That sounds interesting, except that we're a small convention and we need word of mouth to be able to show up. So if we're going to have, I don't know, Tracy Hickman at our convention, wouldn't it behoove us to announce that and perhaps sell a lot of tickets? No, that would obviate the need for having a secret guest. So I'm just saying, I
Sure
tell
enough.
people we're going to have Matt and
All right,
Susie.
Matt Finch and Susie Mosby next week. It's going to be a barn burner. They're going to talk about the Kickstarter that launches next Tuesday. We're going to have a great time talking about all kinds of stuff. We're going to play 20 questions with Susie because, my God, the woman's got a career that most people in the gaming industry would just be jealous to have 1/10 of. And Matt is a good time all unto himself. So it's going to be going to be a lot of fun next week.
Matt's in the North Texas Hall of Fame.
Yep.
That's right.
So, folks, if you're on Discord tomorrow night, hang out from 9 to... I cut out around 10:30. It goes on sometimes to midnight. What can I tell you? Next live stream is Friday at 8. Myself, Glenn Hallstrom, and, of course, Gamers Health on Saturday. Other than that, thank you to Mike. Thank you to Jim. Thank you to everybody in our lively live stream. And as usual, be safe, be well, God bless, roll the dice, roll them well. I'll see you all
Go
tomorrow.
read a book.
Yes.
Oh, my God.
We gave you so many books to read tonight. Read them.
If you're not the most well-read people, it's not our fault for not trying.
Everybody here, I expect you to have read at least half those books we gave you tonight by next week.
He'll be bankrupt.
Half a book. Let's start small, Mike.
Nice.